Right, if you want to join me, absolutely. So, for our first panel discussion at Worktech, I'm joined by 4 leading experts. We'll introduce them in a second, but I want this to be an interactive panel, so start thinking about what you've just described in terms of challenges, trust and so on. And let's really dig into this idea of how do we get people to change. I think we've heard some amazing ideas this morning. We've seen some exciting environments. We've talked about phenomenal technology that could change our world, but it's all about people, isn't it? It's all down to individuals and people, and how and why should people change. So joining me on my panel, we have Ian from Rolls-Royce over there, and we have Christoph from Allianz, who've heard him already at the far end. We have Coen here from AVG, and Hendrik from Vodafone. So to begin with, if you just introduce yourselves, a bit about what you do, but also what do you think are the key challenges for change, either historically or looking forwards? Yeah, please.
Yeah, my name is Hendrik Grempe. I'm heading property for Vodafone Germany, and for the last 3 years was the project leader for one of the biggest office construction sites in Germany, the Vodafone campus in Düsseldorf, where we host 5,000 employees. And we did everything you heard before. We had these change management, we have these reluctant managers who want to give away control and have all these things like we don't trust our people, out of sight is out of control, and all this stuff. And please don't get the misunderstanding that Vodafone is everything the same over the world. It's like more or less like Allianz. It's one company with local roots. And so what is applicable maybe in Paddington in the UK is not the same for Germany, because we came before from the Mannesmann Mobilfunk, the old German economy, and we had everything before, like single offices, you hire to get your higher office. And I think that you have to practice what you preach and start with the upper management or the board to drive this change. Maybe that's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I'm Coen van Oostrom. I'm the founder and CEO of OVG Real Estate. We are specialized in developing and managing offices. We develop roughly 100,000 square meters a year, mostly in Western Europe. I think we are recognized of doing that in a little bit of a different way than other developers, because we focus more on the customer than on the product itself, and try to really optimize the portfolios of the big tenants in Western Europe. For us, sustainability is very important. When we make sustainable buildings for customers, that's the thing that we love most. The most difficult thing for us is let's say, big tradition that we have in the real estate industry. Very often, I sometimes say, if a CEO needs a new building, the first phone call he makes very often defines the whole process that will follow afterwards. If he calls a broker, it will set a certain momentum. If he calls a construction company or an architect, everything I can sort of describe what will happen in the months after, and it will sort of define what kind of technology he will have, if he is going to work open space or not, and all kinds of other things. And I think it's going to be really important that we share more knowledge and that we open up the market a little bit. We try to do that by working together with companies like Philips and Siemens and others, and really attracting their knowledge into our company and sharing that with brokers and advisors and other people. But that openness is something that is still very, very far away in big parts of the sector.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I think it is. I'm Ian Campbell. I'm the property director for Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce got a fairly large property portfolio, 2.2 billion square metres, of which about 400,000 metres squared is in offices. People perceive perhaps that we're mainly a production company, but we actually now have more offices than we do have production facilities, and we've got probably 2/3 of our people that are working or as knowledge workers, and a third as production workers. I think in terms of change and change management within the offices sphere, I think it really comes down to what I term as legacy. We have a large number of legacy buildings. They cause a constraint. We have got a horrendous amount of legacy software and technology. I think there's something like 2,000 different pieces of software within the company that need to be upgraded. But the biggest thing that I think we've got in legacy, and it was touched on before, is attitude, and especially managerial attitude. There's a high degree of view of presenteeism in terms of wanting to be able to look upon your workers, a high degree of attitude in terms of focusing on inputs rather than outputs, and this permeates right through the organisation. So even if, and we've had some successes with what we call agile working from senior management, but sometimes comes as a shock to them that once they've approved it, that it actually has to involve them as well. Just a little story, which is not to do with offices per se. A couple of years ago, we rid ourselves of allocating car parking. If you think office space is controversial, move on to car parking. We managed to do it. We took several months to persuade all of the leadership to go through with this, and it was seen as a great success. But one senior leader turned up in his Ferrari one morning and asked where his car space was because somebody had taken him away. Now, that sort of attitude permeates an organisation and creates a legacy of fraud.
Yeah, Christoph, Rogge, just tell me. What I really think is that change starts with understanding the people, understanding the business requirements. And what really annoys me is just recently we have a project in Istanbul, and the first question we get from the local real estate guys is, how many square do we need? How big what's Vodafone doing? What are they doing? This benchmarking thing. And I think it's nice to understand what the business is doing, what the industry is doing, but I think we have to understand the people in order to provide them the right space and the right amount of space. And I think amount is a good question, but it shouldn't be the first question.
So let's start off. Christoph, in your slide of change, you had a series of layers from leadership. You had the board, and then you had leadership, and you had middle management. But where have the blocks been? I mean, traditionally you hear it's middle management that ends up being the biggest layer, which is the challenge for change. I mean, start with yourself, but the views of the panel. What has been the area of the biggest block in terms of different types of job functions and grades?
Definitely it's middle management, because they lose the most. If you talk about space again, they lose their office, their 3-axis window office. They've been hunting for 15 years in Allianz to finally get this big office to show their neighbors, and now somebody comes and says, take it away, you don't need it. And I think they have the highest stake in this, and they lose the most, and that's why there's the most resistance we see. Senior leadership says, okay, it's fine, I want it, let's do it, it's fine. And other staff, it's works usually, because most of the times they gain, they don't lose stuff. But middle management is the biggest block.
Yes, exactly the same experience, in that senior management are usually always persuaded by the numbers, but when you actually then begin to socialise the change, middle management are not only concerned about what they're losing today, whether usually an office and other symbols, but they're also worried about what they're losing in future, because they aspire to get the bigger office and closer to the corner, etc., etc. So you're taking away not just today's achievement, but the potential for the future. So that is a struggle. It's interesting that it's also culturally different in different countries in the world. The resistance is stronger in some countries than in others, and often for completely different reasons. For instance, in Germany is very process-orientated, structured office culture. So therefore, it's about process and organisation and control. In Norway, which is another place we've met a lot of resistance, it's more about freedom and expression and having a sense of open space. So there are cultural differences that you have to confront. I was going to say fight. I think fight's the wrong thing. I think you've got to confront and persuade as many people as possible. You will not, I'm afraid, persuade all.
And why is Germany seen to be a more challenging environment to implement change? I mean, we've had a few people comment on that this morning. What is it? Is it the workers' councils? Is it something because I mean, Germany was the Bureau Landschaft was born here in the 50s. Actually, it was actually one of the first countries in the world to experiment with landscaped offices, and yet today there's debate that it's actually a tricky culture to introduce change.
It's true. As you mentioned before, we have this funny little institution called Workers' Council, and that's the first step there against any change. If you say we want to implement in Germany, it's a nice word, Großraum. They say, oh, it makes ill, we don't want it, we lose control if the people are able to work more mobile because we don't see them anymore, maybe they don't come to our elections, whatever. And the Germans are used to their traditional offices. It's much about hierarchy. And on the other hand side, we made some experiments with the open space or the Großraum offices in Germany in the 60s and 70s, and they are not very well accepted, but because you don't have a look to acoustics and lighting and all this stuff, and so they don't like it. If you ask, please paint a little picture for an open space office, you see two things: a big hall like in a Chinese sewing fabric, or you see these cubicles like in the US. But they don't know open space, which is a modern setup, and so I think it's the first step, very reluctant against this change to Großraum.
How would they react to Lee Penson's designs for Google that you showed earlier?
But the first reaction is, oh, cool, but not for me. So they like it, and often the normal staff like it more. And as we heard before, the middle management says, but I have so many confidential issues, and it will not work for me. But it's cool. That's the problem. And that, like I mentioned before, you need to start at the upper management, one stakeholder in the board who pushes it, and then it works. So we have no single person offices anymore. Also our board members sit open plan, and that was the biggest lever for change management, because normally you stop at the upper management and say, oh, it's okay, but our directors, no, let them go. And then you have the starting point for the end of the story, because then the normal staff says, we have to do open space, and our upper management sits in their fancy, huge offices. And so I think it's good to start from the top and push it from top down.
Push it down. And talking about buildings, I mean, there was a famous quote that we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. This idea that actually the physical building that you build changes behaviours, it influences behaviours. What do you think we should be building? I mean, I think that you mentioned that often the decisions are made badly, the wrong types of buildings are available on the market, so that compromises how people work. In an ideal world, what buildings would you create?
I would say that the most important thing today is to create flexibility. I was actually surprised that when we started to work in Germany, that there were still companies that actually wanted to have rooms. I think even Allianz in Holland is working quite flexible in all kinds of ways with desk sharing and other things. And in Germany, I don't think it has so much to do with hierarchy. I think it has to do, somebody told me, I've been in university for 12 years. I don't want to sit open space. I have the right, I earned my room. It has to do with knowledge somehow. And that really interests me. However, what I see today in Berlin, I would buy every old building that creates a natural open space, like loft buildings and other buildings, because the younger generation in Germany, everybody wants to be in a cool building. And let's say 90% of the buildings in Germany are sort of, let's say, traditionally built with high quality, but made for rooms. And I think that the way forward is going to make buildings that maybe today will still be used in a room way of working, but in the future will be open space. And that asks a lot for the cooling of a building and all the house technique that you want to make in a building. So that flexibility is going to be the crucial word for the future.
And does that mean you have to change the way you measure efficiency? I mean, from your perspective, then also the panel, because obviously people tend to look at square feet per person. which kind of draws you back to very traditional floor plates, and it's all about efficiency of the floor plate. But if you look at space and the vertical circulation that Lee was talking about, you can't really measure efficiency on that metric. Any thoughts on how you'd demonstrate that a building's efficient in the future?
I think it's a problem, because normally you have these Excel sheets where you calculate the efficiency and all this stuff, and we have some group space guidelines. We say 12 square meter net internal area per desk, and I think 120% utilization. And if you have above, everything is fine. You can put just benches in, and the rest is crap. But it's not the way we want to work, and so it's a good question to measure efficiency beyond these number crunching issues. But I have not the right answer at the moment.
I'm still surprised that in many ways we are still looking at the rental price per square meter, and then we have a 10-year lease or a 15-year lease. What we see in other places is that it gets much more popular to make the cost per employee, and then use desk sharing and use all kinds of other methodologies to make sure that there's flexibility and that there's the coolness that a building needs, but also the quality that a building needs, and then over a certain period of time. And this price per square meter is really something from the last century, I would say.
What do you think?
It's still there.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah, I think we're in a period of change, because I think certainly over the last 20 years, most people internally that manage real estate come from some form of real estate background, so therefore are comfortable with so many meters squared per desk. Frankly, senior management don't really look at it that way. Some junior management look at it that way almost to justify precisely how many centimetres squared they've got in their vicinity. But I think we're moving away from that. We're moving away towards more a look at the overhead cost per employee. What we'd really like, though, and one of the problems that certainly I see when one is competing for office space capital versus production capital, is that production capital has a positive NPV and IRR, and offices are pretty well just regarded as cost. What we've been striving to seek, and we've never really found it, is to get a euro cost of productivity. That's nirvana. So if there's anybody out there in the audience who's working on that, we'd certainly be a client for that one.
I think it's like if you talk about a warehouse, you talk about how many items I get into this warehouse, and this is what we talk about when we talk about real estate for people. It's kind of strange. We talk about occupational ratio. So okay, I can fit into this and that building, this and that many people, but I've seen so many places with 20 square meters near per head count that are horrible, and so many places that are well done with 10 square meters. And I think the space amount doesn't relate, or not primarily relates to the quality of the space. So we really have to understand where we are heading for, and then ask the question: how much space do we need for that?
And what came up in a recent debate is the idea that a building is quite limited in terms of the number of people it can house, mainly because of air circulation, means of escape, and toilets are the kind of three limiting factors which put a cap on how many people can use it. But in this brave new world of measuring cost per employee, the building becomes a home for a large number of people. How do you get around that? What's the solution to make buildings much more aligned to that business objective, and no longer that kind of calculating square feet and therefore toilet ratios and the usual means of escape?
Good question. For our new building in Düsseldorf, we raised the capacity of all the things you mentioned over 30%. Okay. So we planned for a much higher utilization right from the start. And so we have no problems with it. But the funny thing is, we saved 1/3 of space in comparison to the offices we had before. And the utilization is, as shown before, we have 30% empty desks, so out of the building, not in-house mobility. And so if you have an addition for 30% less space and still 30% non-occupied desks. It's still too much space, but it's part of the concept, because it feels more open and more empty and more comfortable if not every seat is occupied. But to come back to the question, we planned a higher amount for toilets, ventilation, and all this stuff.
Thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think it's the crucial question, and how can you sort of bridge the gap between this very old-fashioned building that you have and then the flexibility that a workforce needs. There's a developer in Holland, and that's actually a company that we would really want to buy now. It's a small company, and they build sort of containers, and they gradually build buildings, and then they can reduce them again and take the container out and put it somewhere else. And it's a bit of an experiment, but companies really, really like it, because you could basically say, hey, I need another 1,000 square meters next year or next month, and then they will just plug it in and the building will grow, and then if you take it away, you can recycle the whole building again, and it's it's also very good for the environment. So that's maybe the sort of the holy grail. And I think that the trick for the future will be to have a shell that is pretty much a shell, but inside that shell have a lot of flexibility, even where staircases are, where toilets are, and all kinds of other things. And we shouldn't be seeing buildings as things that we construct for the next 50 or 100 years. We should see them as things that we build maybe for 20 years, and maybe then we don't tear down the building, keep the shell, and then within the shell do something else. I always use the canals in Amsterdam. Houses there were built 400 years ago. Most of them were built for storage of things that came by ship. Then people were living there, then they became offices. Now it's very popular to live there again, and the shell is still there, this beautiful facade is still there, you're still reachable by the water, but the water is now used for entertainment, to have a glass of wine on the water, and in the old days it was different. That flexibility is important for buildings, I guess.
Yes, it's a good question, because we've come across this situation a number of times. First of all, in our legacy stock, you're usually restricted in terms of capacity because of the existing building services. I don't think there's a great deal you can do about that without either expending a lot of money or moving to new space. I think my frustration, though, is with the development industry, the office development industry. Recent example, we were looking at a building capacity, advertised capacity 250. We looked at it, and we believe with agile working we could put 400 people into it, but the newly built, the air conditioning system could only sustain 310. So we decided not to take that property. That developer lost out, we lost out. So I do think in future we need to have, as Coen said, more probably base builds, more build to suits. I think from a corporate occupier point of view, build to suit would probably be the best solution. The only problem is it takes an awful lot longer than a developer build. So you're balancing time against developing something for your end state. I also think we've got to think about, is the office that we traditionally are building the office of tomorrow? I think the office of tomorrow is not going to be just about moving little bits of furniture around in the spaces we've got. I think it's going to be a completely different social-based location, and I think the development industry has to wake up to that as well, because I think they need to be thinking about building different spaces, not the standard that we see in too many Western economies.
Really difficult to find a building that really fits our needs then, and it's the first thing we do. We look at the floor plate and say, okay, this really caters this for flexibility. Can we tear down walls? Are there enough facilities there? Are the staircase is wide enough to cater for more people maybe in the future? And this is a knockout criteria for us. If we say, okay, this building would fit right now, yes, but what happens in 5 years? We increase in staff by 20%, we can move out. And that's a really knockout.
Sorry, you had some early comments from the panel. Your questions from the floor. There must be some interesting ideas that you have Any thoughts from you? Anything that you want to share about change challenges that you've had personally in your organisation, or that you'd like to ask our panel? If you could just tell us who you are to begin with.
Hi, Steve Hennigan from HOK. You're talking about the challenge of change, and you've mentioned a lot about getting senior and middle management buy-in and engagement, but I've not heard the word sponsorship mentioned at all. I was wondering if we could get the panel's view on the importance of senior leadership sponsorship.
And how would you define sponsorship? Just out of interest, what's your definition?
Well, that's what I put to the panel. What do they see as sponsorship, and what do they need from their senior leadership to make these things happen?
Okay, great, good question.
Yeah, good question. I think the most important one is, as said before, that they also practice what they preach. So if they don't have single offices, if they go ahead and say, hey, we will be best practice for this new story, it's a very big lever for every manager underneath the toppest level, the highest level of management. And sponsorship, we had it more or less. Of course, if you have a board of maybe 10, you don't have 10 supporters. Yeah? You have maybe 5 supporters, 3 neutral, 2 detractors, whatever. But you need to bring the supporters in front, and if they go ahead, most upper or middle management will follow. And you have to be aware that you're not able to grant some workarounds or exceptions. With the first one who gets his single offices because he's getting on your nerves for 2 years, the whole concept will fall like a tower of bricks. And I think this is an important one. But we didn't have some sponsorship. We have the commitment from the board members to do so and go ahead. But to be honest, if you have 3 years later a new CEO and he says, I want my 18th floor fit out with high carpet, little wooden walls and all this stuff, the concept will fall in 6 months together. So it's all about people, about management culture and all this stuff, and the people matter. The concept can be as good as it is and as flexible and as cool. If you have a management which is maybe not so open-minded, everything will be screwed back, in my opinion.
Can I add something? What we've seen in our business is that the CFO has become the biggest sponsor of all these changes. And basically what he has said is, I want to save 30% on the cost of housing. And then the whole process started, and then human resource would come in and say, hey, but we can't reduce the square meters by 30%, so we have to be smart. And then all these new work concepts came up, and people started really to discuss, with this outcome of 30% less cost, what can we do to make it fun? And then actually it turned out that it was possible to save a lot of money and still have a really great building, but then you have to desk share or you have to do other things. And funny enough, I would say that the CFO, guarding the cost and becoming the sponsor of the whole process really helped us to start thinking in a different way.
It's a very good question, because I see a marked difference between sponsorship in my production facilities and my office facilities. In my production facilities we have very strong sponsorship, very keen interest, very involved from a sponsorship level in all aspects of the build, from design through to even during the construction stages. On offices, actually, it's devolved to me. It's left to the real estate department because there's not enough interest. Now, in our Agile program, we've had 1 or 2 examples where local leadership have taken that sponsorship role, and I think the success of the one I've got in mind, which was in Indianapolis in the United States, was because the local management took a strong interest, took a strong sponsorship role, and the real estate department just became a provider of ideas and delivery solutions rather than driving the change, because the change is not the building, change is not the technology, it's the people that need to change. And that's if you don't get sponsorship, certainly in agile work programs, I think you're almost doomed to fail, because you'll have some very pretty space with some cool kit, but the people haven't changed.
Same with us. We had the recent project, we changed our holding area, Allianz holding in the COO area, and our group COO moved into open space as well. And first people didn't really believe this city has, but he's kind of single office as always. But really, he went into open space. There's no door, no security, no nothing. And we really had to convince our security people to say, okay, let's see all staff. But I think this really helped from the start, from the point where was decided he doesn't get his single office. People really believed in it and said, okay, this is cool. He's one of us. It's one area. There's 260 people in this area. They're all in open space, and this really helps us on the implementation floor to say, okay, we look at him. He's doing it. Why can't you? I think sponsorship at this point is very important.
Interesting. Yeah. Next question. Anyone else want to?
Price per square meter to price per employee. I understand the business case of the companies, the user company. Can you elaborate a little bit on the business case from the real estate perspective, as a real estate owner, real estate provider?
Well, to start with, I would say the real estate industry is a bit in trouble because the whole process of making a building and then selling it to an institutional investor has all kinds of little rules around it. Rules about has to be a 10-year lease, otherwise you can't sell it. We don't really want to have flexibility. The building also always should have sort of a quality that is the same as the quality that we've always made, so experimenting is difficult. For example, we are making a building for Deloitte in Amsterdam at the moment, and we're using something new called light over Ethernet, so computer wiring is going to serve the LED lighting, which gives a lot of good stuff around it. Investors, however, are saying, well, we don't really want to buy a building like that because it hasn't been done before, and how can we check the box if it hasn't been done before? So I think the real estate industry really has to change. I think that the business cases have to change. I think if somebody would come up with I use the example of this container building, if somebody would just buy 10 million of those little containers and make buildings out of them, but would do it for 50% cheaper because he could make them in China or whatever, and by that he'd be able to create a business case where people could just lease for 2 years instead of 10 years, that he would take over the market. And the thing is that all these people here in the room that actually rent those spaces should be flexible and understand that there's a different kind of approach now in the market. But I have no doubt that the time is over that we would just make a building and then put a for let sign on the roof and then hope that somebody will knock the door and move in. What we see in the Netherlands is that the total office space that is needed is going down every year. This flex space, this flex working is becoming so cool. The CFO really enjoys it and the employees actually like it as well, that the total stock is diminishing every year with a couple of percent. A couple of percent is a lot in the real estate markets. And people want to work in inner cities. They don't want to work anymore at the outskirts, like we see them in Frankfurt and some other cities also in Germany. I think there is going to be a lot more change also to the real estate industry than we are thinking about today.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's a question at the back.
So, I'm not a real estate person as such, but I noticed that...
Could you tell us who you are, actually?
I'm Chester, sorry, from Orange.
Thank you.
In many ways, sometimes the building mirrors the hierarchy of the organisation, and you see what we've seen today from Link and from other sort of areas is that the communication streams are becoming more and more loops rather than hierarchy. So if I think of what we've seen from Penson and Google, transformations yielding high productivity, it's through very dynamic offices, dynamic organisations with very, very short flows of organisation. So my question really is, where we've seen technology and the workplace being demand-led and transforming from a demand-led perspective, how important do you see organisational change as a way forward to transform the office? Because those hierarchies are still in place. And how important do you see it, and have you seen it being done in your own working environments?
Interesting. Any thoughts from the panel?
I think at the moment we are already working in matrix organizations that are not that hierarchical like before anymore, because we have project teams, we have new task forces, and how do you call it? And so I think it's changing already, but I think also in the future there will ever be some hierarchy to keep a company running, to have some guidelines and all this stuff. And but regarding all these topics, it's important to have more flexibility. Like you said before, you have to be flexible to have these co-working spaces or these all these stuff, these zones, whatever, to work together, because it's getting back from these hierarchical silos more to a matrix and team-based organization. Yeah, so I think it's changing, but not completely. So you will have some hierarchical organizations still, and the building, I'm not sure, maybe will reflect it in the future. At the moment they try to foster these collaboration issues, but yeah, on a medium basis, in my opinion.
I think we're in a process of change within the workplace in terms of moving away from hierarchies. I think though that those companies that are more process driven rather than creative find it a bigger struggle. There are also quite a number of barriers in your way. I think it was Peter of Microsoft showed a slide this morning where he showed the interactive, where you find the informal networks across an email system. I only smile to think how I'd bring that to a works council to explain to them we're going to monitor their email system. So that's just not going to happen. Certainly not for a few. So I think there's some barriers. Frankly, from a space point of view, I think we're trying to anticipate those informal networks. If we move into non-allocated desking arrangements, we hope people will naturally move into it. But again, I think it comes back to you can only do so much with physical attributes. You know, it really needs to be managerial change, and that's quite difficult because you then have a manager who is a part of the hierarchy trying to work out informal networks. So I think a long way to go on that.
I think that there's an interesting example, and that's Facebook. We went to San Francisco to have a look at how those companies are working, what can we learn from that. And the interesting thing with Facebook is that you have sort of a campus with a lot of open space, and all these very smart programmers are working there. And that's basically one person who has a private room, and that's Mark Zuckerberg. It's right in the middle of the campus, it's on the ground floor, so you can see that he's there and that he's working. And then every Friday at 5 o'clock he walks outside, takes a microphone, and he tells the people what's happening for him. So people would actually ask him, so what did you do with the 60 billion that you made last week? And he would actually answer that question. It would be taped, and then people living in Europe could see it on the next morning, and there would be a lot of interaction. And I think that the big challenge for us over the next 10 or 20 years will be the war for talent. And the culture of a company and the way that this CEO will present himself, and if that is a high-rise building in Frankfurt and him sitting on the top floor with the biggest office, will define the way the culture of the company will be and the kind of talent that they can attract. And maybe more than ever, senior management has to answer the question, how do we want to present ourselves to young people? And if that is open, flexible, and sort of not too hierarchical, it might actually work better for the company than it did in the past.
Philip, microphone in the back. What does the manifesto tell us?
What we did in our organization is basically listen to our employees. When we did the original employee workspace satisfaction survey, I made it very clear that this was an election and that the participation rate for the election was high. So I immediately clacked up on the folks and said, look, if everybody wants to come and whinge afterwards, there's not going to be any time for it. We had 83%
participation of the survey. Then we played it back to the people and we said, this is what you're saying to us. Yeah? And they said, we understand it, and then we went to the draftsman's board and we designed it. And they felt that they were co-creators for the whole program. And it just showed up. We asked them, what are you doing? 30 different things that you can do in the office. Are you happy with all these things? And we could see the zones where things needed to be applied. It wasn't perfect by the time we came out of it. And we are actually going to get the bonus for the real estate guy, or the space manager as we call it, directly linked to the employee workspace satisfaction index. So if it goes down 1 year for this in this building, you'll have less commission to take home, or bonus. Yeah.
So a good example about employee participation. I think we're at the end of our time slot, so I want to kind of go to a last comment from the panel. I mean, it seems from what we've heard today, and from what we're seeing, that actually the end result is great. You know, when you get there, people would never go back. You said that in Amsterdam, flexible working is cool, people are enjoying it, and you've seen some great example in Philips' example where the tracking of employee engagement is significant. If there's one thing to get right in change, what would it be? And how can, if people are so sceptical of change, what is the best way of getting over that scepticism and showing people that the journey is worth taking, and that in effect there's a win-win at the end? Who's that a win, Christoph?
Maybe, but pretty sure. It's if you talk the truth and people understand that it's not the standard management blah we're hearing. It's really the truth people are talking about, and people get their or the feedback is valued properly. I think then if you get the trust of the people, it's best.
So engagement and trust.
Yeah.
The one thing I've learned over the last few years is not try to teach to people. So actually get them involved and get them engaged.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be quite difficult at the start. You need to find the champions. But our most successful projects so far have been those where the real estate property department is secondary. It's actually the people that are going to occupy it have taken control of that space. You need to set parameters, that's fine. CFO wouldn't have it any other way. But give them some control, because then they feel it's their space.
Yeah.
What works best for us is to create really, really great examples. Sometimes we talk to a company and we say, hey, why don't you do flex working and desk sharing, etc. And they might be reluctant, and then we take them on a tour and we show them different buildings, different examples, and we show them the right examples, and then they look around and they're like, wow, great, if this is possible. And then the Workers' Council come a couple of months later, and they're very reluctant always, and we show them around and we let them talk to other worker councils at the other examples. And they actually hear that things improve instead of just being a CFO that want to save money. And if those examples are good, even small examples, then the rest will follow.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
We did the same. In addition, we built 2 pilot spaces. The first one in the HR department, and that was a big rumor in the company because there are normally 2 departments which are not fit. The HR department and legal. So we started with HR because the head of HR came from Procter & Gamble in an open space environment as a new hire to Vodafone, and he built it in his space and lead by example. And the second time, as the second one, we take the legal department because in the past, long ago, I'm a lawyer by profession. I was in the legal department, and I said, I know you can work in a different way, so we also made it there. And this was the first big step to take people with you. And then I can absolutely agree to the point. It's mobile working is about trust from the management to the employees, lead by example, and then you will manage to drive the change, but you have to have a long period of time and to talk again and again, like to repeat your prayers, and then after years it will work. And once the people are in the new building and it's well designed and made, and you have all these acoustic and lighting and all this stuff we had before, most of the people, I said over 80%, we also made a post-occupancy survey with also 84% employees who said we like to work at the new building and environment, and then it will work. But you need your time. You will need your time. That's a big thing. Yeah.
to the missing 16%. That's what we have to look at.
You have ever this don't look at this 16.
No.
They don't like it if it's new, if it's old, if it's big, if it's still or open. They don't like it anyway. So go for the 84.
Yeah, much better. On that note, can I please thank my panel? It's been a fantastic debate. We're now going to break for lunch, just under an hour. Please enjoy the Innovations exhibition and come back here for 2:25. Thank you.
Thanks.